Okay, so basically the interview will revolve mostly around A is for Agustin, but also on some tangential topics like your filmmaking career. No? So maybe we'll begin with sort of a contextual background, why you're into filmmaking, and then we'll go to details of the film, and then later we'll talk about more general issues about filmmaking. All right. Hopefully this won't last more than an hour.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Sige, first of all, um, what got you into filmmaking? What's your background?
Actually, what got me into filmmaking, it was coincidental. I didn't have like that kind of story where it started with like me when I was a kid liking films. It
Yeah.
was like very coincidental. So my background was in behavioral sciences. I was in UP Manila. I wanted to take up psychology,
Mm.
and then my brother was taking up film in UP
Oh,
Dalawan.
older brother.
And older brother.
Yeah.
And so I saw him like editing, doing all these fun stuff at home. And I was like, why am I reading all these books? And he's like editing and shooting and
Having
having
fun.
so much fun. I want to do that too.
Yeah.
So second year, I transferred to Diliman and
Mm.
took up film, and I fell in love with the medium. I had so much fun learning about how to operate the camera, how to interact with people. Because film is a very collaborative medium.
Yeah.
I had fun. Basically, learning how people make their films, where
Mm.
they get their inspirations from. So yeah, I'm a people person, so I enjoy this medium because of that, and also what it can do. That's why I sort of delved into documentary filmmaking, because I get to see different places and
Mm.
explore using my camera, and also just hang out with the people who I document or interact with. So
Mm.
yeah, that's really what got me. There's no like profound background
Yeah.
with filmmaking with me. So yeah, that's how I started.
That's nice. So is your brother also into documentary filmmaking, or is he in another field right
so
now?
that was that's what's funny, because he started doing film, but then he ended up not making films. Like
Ah.
after he graduated, he did like web design stuff, and
Mm.
so now he's in Brisbane, Australia, working there, making website stuff for a school. Or I actually don't know what he's doing. He's doing some IT related stuff.
That's nice.
So Brisbane, yeah.
How about your background in? Well, you had 1 year in behavioral sciences.
Hmm.
Were you able to take some major courses that you felt were able to help you in your filmmaking, or hindi na wala namang ganun?
So actually, I started with behavioral sciences, so that's a combination of anthropology, sociology, and psychology. And then I
Mm.
did film for 4 years, and then after that, I was like, oh, I want to do a graduate school in psychology. So I had 1 year of psychology masters in UP Dalaman.
Oh.
And so after that, I was like, wait a minute, everyone's working in film while I'm studying. So it's like a long, complicated process of me trying to figure out whether I wanted to work or I wanted to study. And so
Yeah.
for 10 years, I sort of worked in film, did advertising jobs, did documentary films, made videos for NGOs, and that kind of work. And
Mm.
then I just set myself like an objective that I wanted to make a feature film. And then
Mm.
after that, I was like, okay, after my feature film, then I'm going back to grad school. And so that's why I'm here.
So, are you still taking up psychology or in a different field?
Um, I'm in a different field. So it's an interdisciplinary field in University of Wisconsin Madison. It's called Southeast Asian Studies. It's
Oh,
a
wow.
graduate studies program, all focused on Southeast Asia. So I learn about anthropology, sociology, or any kind of field, but it's all focused on Southeast Asia.
That's nice. Yeah, I'm also actually I'm based in Ateneo's interdisciplinary studies. So, yay, go interdisciplinary studies.
It's such a
um,
fun field.
yeah, it
Like
is.
you're not
Yeah,
restricted with,
I know.
yeah.
But yeah, I actually, my undergrad was anthro and my master's was social development. So, and I'm also kind of interested in film. So, yeah, I think we can get along in terms of interests. Okay, so thanks for that brief background. Now let's talk about your films. No, before you made A is for Agustin, I noted that you were involved in some um, feature filmmaking as part of the crew. And then you made a short called what's the title again of that
Bonifacio.
short? Bonifacio,
And then
which is actually in terms of themes is very much a relative of A's for Agustin, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
about both Bonifacio and like the other
Yeah, yeah. So that your
movies.
career before you made your first feature.
Okay. So after after college, I delved into NGO
Mm,
videos, and then I was commissioned by the European Union to create a medium length documentary about mining in
mm,
Kabangan, Zambales. So that's Agustine's area. And so because mining was a very dangerous topic back then, like the ITAs were getting death threats from the companies.
mm,
I being a what was my age back then? I was just like fresh out of college.
yeah.
Being fresh out of college, I was kind of scared to delve into something that was so dangerous. And so I did an ocular, saw that the Aita, it was like an indigenous land of the Aitas. And then I thought, why not reframe, like, why not divert the angle of the documentary and focus on the indigenous peoples in the area,
Mm,
and flesh out like the plight of the Aitas in the community, and in a way like touch up on different problems like mining and education and their problem with their ancestral land and getting
yeah,
a certificate of ancestral domain title,
yeah.
and how the bureaucratic process is really tedious, especially for the indigenous peoples.
Mm,
So when I made that documentary, it took me a couple of months just going back and forth. And it was actually from there that I met Agustin, because when I was doing the educational leg, I saw him and he was planting in the garden with the kids. And I thought, like, wait, maybe he's like a janitor or a
yeah.
worker in the school. And then the teacher told me, no, he's actually in grade one. And I was like,
Mm,
really? And so I included him as part of the interview for that mining documentary,
mm,
and then learned that he has such a charismatic character, and I just kind of fell in love with with his motivations and like his outlook in life, and he's so cheerful despite
yeah.
like being in this community that, you know um like he's surrounded every day by uh like you see the slow violence
Yeah.
that's kind of not that's very pervasive in their community and that they kind of got used to.
Yeah.
um and then after that documentary, the Aita chieftain actually told us that, hey, your documentary kind of pushed the local government in the area to put an end to the, it was a small scale mining, but still I'm not sure if it's true or not, but he was the one who said Like,
Mm,
we really appreciate your little film, because in that documentary we also interviewed the mining owners, like the
okay.
company owners. So I guess they were kind of scared that why are we being hounded by people with cameras? Why are we being
Yeah.
questioned about like land ownership and all that stuff? And we also interviewed the mayor. So I think that
Mm,
kind of put pressure in their little town to
mm,
put an end to mining. So that, like, that interaction actually motivated me to make more films. I was like, oh,
mm,
maybe like film is a powerful medium,
yeah.
whichever way you look at it. Um, and it sheds light to different socioeconomic issues
Yeah.
in wherever place you go. So that's one of my like passion projects. But what really kept me going, or what was my bread and butter, was sort of like doing working as an assistant director or an
Mm,
editor for mainstream films or independent films.
mm,
um, so I got into being an assistant director for TV series like Ilustrado, Bayan Ko. What's up? Bayan something. I forget the name of the series with
Bayan ko, I
Red.
think.
Yeah, yeah. It was
Uh,
like, I think it was a series just before the elections. It
yeah.
was with Rocco Nacino, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, so I did assistant directing for independent
Yeah.
films.
I saw in IMDb it's Bayan ko.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did that. I apprenticed for under um Clang season. He was the editor of Ang Pagdadalaga ni Maximo Oliveros.
Mm,
So I did editing for a time in Makati, doing um, editing jobs for advertising agencies. And then after that, so I made documentaries, and then I apprenticed under Klang season, and wanted to become an editor. And then I delved into editing in Makati. And then after that, I was like, I want to get out of the four corners of
mm,
the editing room, because I think it was kind of unhealthy. I was
yeah.
just being fed fast food and then editing like
Yeah.
24 hours and sometimes even more. And so I apprenticed under Bombi Plata.
Okay.
He's a really great assistant directing mentor. And then after that, I got projects as an assistant director. And then from there, I was still making NGO videos and all that stuff.
Okay.
Um, what did I answer my your
Yeah, yeah,
questions?
yeah. But I was gonna ask, through all these years that you're doing uh, work as assistant director in some projects, um, were you already beginning with AS for Agustin?
Yeah, so I started A is for Agustin 2011. So when I was doing that mining documentary, I was already like thinking about documenting Agustin's life. But of
Mm,
course, back then I still didn't get like, I
yeah.
was still building my rapport with Agustin. And so
Mm,
from 2011 until 20, like last year, I was still like I've been consistently going back and forth to Kabangan Zambales and documenting. I think after 2011, that's when I fully got his permission to follow him
mm,
around and document his story.
mm,
Um, yeah, it was kind of my breast from the hustle and bustle of Manila.
yeah.
Um, like when I would get really frustrated with work or the lack thereof in Manila, I would go back to Kabangan Zambales, where everything was very simple, and it kind of reminded me of like what's really important,
Yeah.
as cheesy as it sounds,
Yeah.
in life. Like when you interact with people who actually they don't have anything, but yet they're still happy. Like it kind of reminds me that like this is like whatever you're going through in Manila is all temporary. It's,
Yeah.
you know, yeah. So I was doing that from 2011 until 2019, and then I'm here. Um,
Um, the film was part of Q Cinema, right? Yeah.
yeah,
What made you decide to enter that film in the film fest?
in Q Cinema.
Yeah.
Um, so my the way that I was able to fund my film was through personal funds and um, through asking for donations from parents. So
Yeah.
that's what kind of propelled it until 2017, 2018. And then I met a friend who actually told me about um, venues where I could get film grants, which the first was in South Korea. It was called
Mm,
DMC Docs.
yeah.
And so I pitched the film and then made a little trailer and then got a grant. But
Okay.
then it was still not enough to finish the film.
Yeah.
And I thought like, yeah, let's do Q Cinema and try the post production grant in Q Cinema.
Mm,
And yeah, I like the idea that it already had like a sure festival,
yeah.
because like that's the main goal, or that's the main objective of the film, is to be shown to Filipinos, to,
Yeah.
you know, show Filipinos in Manila that these things exist. Like, even though it's a topic that's been heard over and over again,
Yeah.
um, we shouldn't turn our eyes away from these realities, and
Yeah.
um, just try to keep pounding them with what's happening around. So
So when you pitched the film to DMZ Docs and Q Cinema, um, tapos na ba lahat ng I mean, in your mind, parang buo na yung kwento ni Agustin or parang continuing pa siya?
when I pitched it in DMZ Docs, it was still continuing.
Yeah.
Um, I forget when. Yeah, it was still continuing because I didn't want to end the film with him graduating, and
Mm,
then you see that as sort of an ending of for the film.
yeah.
I think just ending it in a happy tone doesn't give justice to what's really happening, and I didn't want to give the audience
Mm,
like kind of that false
yeah.
Cinderella type of story where you
Yes.
when you start something and you finish it, you'll be
Yes.
happy.
Yeah.
I wanted to see the reality of what's happening, that even though like you try over and over, as long as you're stuck in that systemic like like injustice,
Mm,
um it's so hard to get out of it.
yeah. Yeah.
It's a sad reality that I wanted to show people, that as long as there are of course there are outliers, that who get to really succeed from rags to riches, but
Mm,
like if we are in a system where we're constantly being like fed lies, and
yeah.
we're constantly being uh paano ba, parang I don't know how to put it, uh kung bulok na yung sistema, I guess it's
Mm,
so hard to get out of that sometimes, well, most of the time. So yeah, when I was editing and I was reviewing the footage, I thought that it wasn't ready yet, and so I sort of continued until I found the perfect ending,
mm.
or yeah.
Were you the sole editor of the film?
No, so I my the editor of my film is actually an American, but
Okay.
he studied Filipino. He's very good in Filipino.
Nice.
He also used to be my partner, so
Mm,
that made everything like easy because we were just in one area.
mm,
And he lived in the Philippines for a year and a half. So he's kind of introduced to the culture.
mm,
But of course, because he's not really from the Philippines, it's
yeah,
hard to actually just give it to him and let him decide
yeah.
which is with like how to put piece things together. So I did most of the assistant editing work.
Okay.
Like these are the things that I want to include in the film, and so I would piece it roughly together and then I would throw it at him and he would kind of you know um edit it, and say sometimes he would say like it doesn't work, it doesn't make the story progress. And
Mm,
so there's a lot of communication and back and forth, and at the end of the day it's just trusting your creative collaborative, when he says that it's not going to make the story progress. Because like I think as a film, like as a director producer and as a camera operator as well of a documentary, it's kind of easy to get so obsessed with some of the scenes and some
yeah.
of the shots. But you have a creative but having like a creative collaborator saying no, it's not going to make your story progress, is I
Mm,
think a really big help
right.
in just trying to narrow down or um, remind you of the focus of the film.
Yeah. How long was the footage that you worked with? Like how many hours?
A lot. We had, I actually forget, but it was like hundreds and
I'm
hundreds of
sure.
hours of footage from
Yeah.
2011.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did it make it hard for you to like remember, or did you have a system of okay, this particular shoot, I know this will be part of the final edit.
Um, because I was since 2011, I was thinking of making the documentary already. So I
Mm,
was always reviewing the footage, piecing things
mm,
together. But what I didn't know back then, or what I haven't decided back then, was whether to make it a short documentary, a mid-length documentary, or a full-length documentary.
yeah.
But I was always like looking at the footage, trying to piece it together, making notes. I have like a notebook full of notes. And so that kind of helped the editor as well,
Mm,
um, to actually uh, help me decide how to mix and match or how
yeah.
to rearrange scenes or how to put things together.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think just having like that notebook and having all those notes really helped
Mm.
me and the editor in the final
Um,
project.
yeah. Nick Diocampo, the film historian and documentary filmmaker, recently mentioned in I think Daang Docu. He had a master class there, and I remembered him saying documentaries are 80% subject and 20% everything else, like editing, camera work. Do you agree with him?
80% the subject and 20% the camera work and the technical
Yeah,
stuff.
technical stuff.
Mm, maybe 30 or 40%, like, because a lot of, well, actually I don't know. Um because I think what made it what made it for me, what made it work was the years that I spent in the community, just
Mm,
knowing how to hang around and knowing when to pick up the camera and having that, like the sensitivity of when to just be in the moment, um, and just watch things unfold before you without bringing out your camera and recording, because sometimes having the camera would ruin certain moments.
mm,
So um, I would say yes to that, but at the same time, I think as a filmmaker and as a human, you kind of build that sensitivity of
Mm,
knowing like what are the things that I should document. What are like there are many moments when the scene looked really good in camera, like when they're fighting and whatever,
yeah,
and I really wanted to pick up my camera, but then I like as a person,
yeah,
as a friend of Agustin, you didn't want him to feel awkward, and you didn't want
yeah,
to put him in that kind of situation. So I think also the sensitivity of the filmmaker and the kind of relationship you build with I don't like using the word subject. It's
yeah,
so condescending and it's so with whoever.
yeah,
I don't know what term to use. It always makes me cringe to call them subjects because it feels so condescending and
yeah.
yeah.
I understand. Yeah. Uh,
Um Protagonist, I don't know. With Agustin, like
yeah.
um yeah, so subject, the camera, the technical stuff, and I would also include the filmmaker's kind of agency in
Mm,
putting things together. I
yeah,
think that's because having a good technical background and having a good, you know, story isn't enough. There
yeah,
has to be like that person who mediates between the two and making sure that you know your subject is protected and respected and made sure that he also has choices, that
yeah,
he's just not like um my brain isn't functioning, but he also has choices, and he is just like not a
yeah,
passive actor or passive person taking in all or experiencing things. He can also say no, I'm not comfortable being filmed right now, or no, I'm not in the mood. So me as a filmmaker, I see those cues from Agustin, and I would be like, okay, Agustin, I'll just see you tomorrow, or I'll see you next week, or I'll see you whenever,
yeah.
and just let me know when you're
Right.
okay or whatever. So yeah, I would agree and disagree, but I would add in the component that
Yeah.
yeah.
I understand your perspective. It's interesting that you brought up sensitivity, filmmaker sensitivity to the equation, because I've really been thinking a lot about ethics, the role of ethics in documentary filmmaking, particularly documentary filmmaking, um, regarding consent, and the things that you've talked about, but also uh, taking up their time. In anthropology, especially, we both have a background in anthropology. We take it very seriously, right? Um, I notice in documentary films, there's the audience is um, left clueless about um, the continuing role of the filmmaker to the life of the film subject. Parang ang isipin natin, okay, we're most of the time we go to the marginalized sectors, we film their lives with the intention of shedding a light on the issues that they're facing. But then even us in YCC, we're still trying to understand, is that is that act in itself exploitative? Na parang, okay, I'm doing this for my career. I'm shedding light on issues of the poor, but then I leave and then I go somewhere else. What are your thoughts on that, Grace?
That's actually something that I've been contemplating and still struggling with, especially since I've been there since 2011.
Yeah,
There are a lot of moments where I would just like, go in the community and, see that these things exist. Like sometimes Agustin wouldn't be eating 3 meals a day. And so I would think like, what am I doing here? I'm making a film. I'm documenting
Mm.
someone's struggle, and for what? Is it
Yeah.
like, would it better his circumstance? And it it was such a hard thing to think about. um like whenever I would be there, I would always, think about like, what is this film really doing? Is it
Mm.
to improve someone else's lives by, shedding light,
Mm.
which is kind of similar to a white savior complex, kind
Mm.
of like, I'm here with my camera and I'm going to show other people what
Mm.
reality is like, which is for me very, I'm still trying to marry that concept with my values.
Mm.
um but I don't know, it's still something that I am struggling with
Mm.
currently. uh these are the things that are so hard to think about, especially since in like I have this communism class
Mm.
recently, and that's sort of one of the things that we always talk about, like, what is your role as an academic,
Mm.
um, to like, to the common people or to the masses. Is it enough to just talk about and like write papers and apply all these theoretical frameworks about other people's lives, and
Mm.
you know um, share it to other intellectuals and all that stuff? Is that enough? So it's a very hard topic or a subject that I'm still struggling with.
Mm.
And especially when I would present this film to other people and then they would ask, how can we help?
Mm.
It's so easy to say, okay, just give them cash, but that's
Yeah.
not how it works. Like, you
Yeah.
can't just stole the money and expect that everything would be better. So whenever they would ask, how can we help? I would say, I really honestly have no idea, because
Mm.
that's also one of the things that I wanted to do, but still I'm still struggling with that as of this present day.
Mm.
Like, if you just give them money, then it creates that um, culture of dependency on aid or on outside
Yeah.
um, help. And so I think that's also one of the things, or one of the reasons why I pursued grad school, because like having so okay, I've made a film about someone else's life, and I've shown it to the Philippines, um and then what? Like, nothing's happening. I am just furthering my career as a filmmaker, but Agustin is still in his community suffering, or not being able to eat 3 meals a day, and he's still there while I'm here in the US, furthering my career. Um, but I think, yeah, one of the motivations for me to study, and one of my research topics really, is on like the different factors involving indigenous peoples.
Mm.
And so, like, I think my objective or my end goal in mind always is to be able to give back to the Philippines. So after I'm here, then I go back, and then hopefully I'll be able to um, be in an NGO that could directly help the
Mm.
marginalized sectors, or all that. Um, yeah, I don't know if
Yeah.
it answered your
Yeah,
question.
it did. I appreciate your candor about your sort of struggle about these very difficult dilemmas, no? About the role of art um, in in a very messed up world. Um, Everyone is sort of grappling with those issues, I'm sure. Because on the one hand, one could always say um, that shedding light is enough. No, shedding light is enough because not a lot of people know these issues. But then on the other hand, if the powers that be are still blind, no, the policymakers who don't usually watch these kinds of films,
Exactly.
if they're not sort of required or strongly encouraged to do so, then parang ano rin, parang 'di ba, parang dadaan lang, kumbaga, dadaan
Hmm.
lang sa consciousness. Um, you mentioned something about your advocacy for indigenous well-being, welfare. One of the things that I really liked about the film is it's not very its politics is not very forceful. It's not very didactic, but you still feel it. I said that in our deliberations of the film, I felt like yeah, I could feel the filmmakers' sort of exasperation with the system by following Agustin in a seemingly absurd situation, a very like a middle-aged man in a classroom of 7-year-olds, um, and also looking at the exploitation that went on with this employer. Um, the one thing I took away from the film is sort of the discrepancy between the the knowledge that the indigenous have, um, that is not appreciated in the dominant, mainstream capitalistic society. Kasi merong pinapahalagahang educational system, kumbaga. I remember the teacher saying, paano pag hindi ka pumasok dito sa eskwela, anong matutunan mo? And then Agustin said, wala. But then if you really think about it, there are a lot of knowledge that our indigenous brothers and sisters know that are not being prioritized or given importance in our current system. Kasi nga, well, they're not useful in this capitalistic world. Um, Things about, yeah, like being part of nature, no? Knowing these stuff about pag-uuling and things like that, the cycle of nature, is very much sort of inherent to them, but to us it's kind of alien. So and those are the things that I want to, because as a teacher, parang may dilemma rin ako na parang okay, I'm imparting knowledge to students um, that um, can be used as fuel for their future positions in the capitalistic world. The good thing about my field in social sciences and humanities is um, I'm not necessarily sort of part of a trade. I'm teaching them skills about computer or IT stuff because, yeah, parang yun yung parang tinutukoy ko na more of we're preparing soldiers for capitalism. Kumbaga. um, so yeah, that's one thing I really like about the film. And, very very lyrical, very quiet, but it packs a wallop uh, in its sort of subtle message. Um, Let me just go through some of the questions I listed here. Um, you mentioned that you didn't want to show Agustin graduating. Did he ever graduate?
Yes, he did. He
Ah,
graduated.
wow.
I forget when. basta 6 years after 2011.
Ah, okay.
2017.
All right.
2017. He did graduate. But because I wanted to show yung son niya graduating.
Mm,
I think that's what's when I placed Augustine's graduation um in the film and then placed Noy's graduation in the film and then I watched it. It was just too much graduations in one film. And so me and my editor we were discussing it, and we
Mm,
sort of, weighed whose graduation is much more
mm,
important to push the story
okay,
forward, and yun, pinili namin yung kay Noy.
right. Um, in YCC, there was a bit of discussion about um, there was some confusion actually about kasi para ang lumabas is um, parang hindi naman nakafocus kay Noy ang kwento, 'di ba, kay Agustin. But then parang biglang sumulpot na lang na graduate si Noy. So parang yung iba they felt that something went missing in the narrative with Noy just graduating tapos parang hindi masyadong na, naging
Flesh out.
malinaw on yeah na flesh out, especially the part where Agustin decided to stop schooling. No, I noticed it was mentioned briefly in the conversation with his wife, di ba? Na parang unahin muna natin si Noy uh, sa graduation siguro or sa pag-aaral. Pero some of the members felt na it felt rushed, a bit rushed towards the end. Did you have some difficulties in editing the latter part of the film?
I actually had difficulties with shooting Noy in the film because
Mm,
Noy isn't actually, so Agustin never had a biological
yeah.
offspring, and Noy is the son of uh, his current wife.
Mm,
And so he would always not be around whenever I
mm,
would be there. He was camera shy also, so
mm.
whenever he knew that I was in the community, he would go back to his aunt or something. And so yung mga scenes na nandun siya, those were the scenes that like he allowed me to shoot.
Yeah.
That's why I was also having I when I was editing with my editor, that was actually one of the things that we were discussing. Like,
Mm,
don't you feel it's weird that he just shows up towards the end? And I'm like, what can we do? That those are the only footage we have of
yeah.
him because he's always not around, or he doesn't want to be shown in the camera.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
also noted that I think it's not just your film, but many good documentary films, recent ones, sort of um, shy away from talking heads. Um, I really like those kinds of films. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Harvard. What's that thing? There's a lab there. There's a filmmaking
Oh, the sensory
sensory
lab.
ethnography. Yeah, sensory
Yeah.
ethnography lab. I really love their films. They're ethnographies, right? They're like very slice of life kind of documentaries. Um, did you feel like you were constrained by that stylistic decision of not employing talking heads?
Well, um, I always had the choice of including the talking heads, but I wanted the film to be coming from Augustine's perspective, like from his personal perspective.
Mm,
And I guess including interviews with the teacher, interviews with the chieftain, interviews with other members of Augustine's community would kind of dilute that
yeah.
objective in mind of having everything come from his perspective. And
Mm,
so I decided last minute to just use his own voice as a sort of voiceover narrative to
mm,
piece things together. And these are like interviews that I've conducted over the years. So it's not just one sit down interview. So I
right.
would always interview him like 2011, 2012. So if you'd notice, actually the sound design people had such a hard problem, like had a problem trying to make the sound very consistent because
Mm,
like in 2011 I was using this kind of mic, or I didn't know how to record audio. So
yeah.
there would be a lot of hissing sound. And these are the things, like these interviews that I've used or as a voiceover narrative for the film. would be something that I would ask them, like once something has happened. Like for example, has been if he discovered that he was being cheated on by the boss, then I would ask him after it has happened, like, how do you feel? And then I would ask him again a few days later or a few months after, just to see like how he reflects on these moments of his life. And then I would choose which one I think is the most reflective of that. And then I would include it as a voiceover narrative for to piece
Mm,
the scenes together.
yeah,
So yeah.
that's nice. Um, I noticed that in the Philippines, most documentary filmmakers are women. And my theory is that it's because women are more patient and women are more trusted. Um, is that your sense also, or do you have another theory?
Ang galing. May ginagawa kaming paper, academic paper about that. It's called Feminization of Truth-telling in industries or careers, saying that like yung current trend is that journalists and documentary filmmakers are all women. Like those who are currently in those fields are women, starting
Yeah,
from the Marcos
yeah,
law, like Marcos dictatorship until present. Like there's been like a feminization of the that truth telling.
mm,
And I think, yeah, I think um being a woman also helps a lot in terms of it has its pros and cons. Paano ba? I was just actually talking about this with Marisa Aroy, and I asked her if being a woman actually impacted or affected the way she would make films. And she said it's just a different ball game. Some people would, you know, not would have their guards down kapag babae yung kausap nila, and you would be able to actually navigate through the personal lives of whoever you're talking to much better,
mm,
because I'm not sure, siguro dahil feeling ng mga tao wala kaming magagawang masama,
yeah,
wala kaming gagawing masama, or I don't know, it's also reflective of how the society views
yeah.
women,
I'm sure.
um na yun nga, hindi ka makabasag pinggan, wala kang gagawing masama. So, mas papapasukin ka nila more than men. I'm not sure if that's a good kind of way of putting it. Um, but yeah, definitely being a woman in this kind of industry has its pros and cons.
Mm,
Cons would be, you know, sometimes you're always fearing for your safety, trying to navigate, like for example kay Alex, you know, yung film ni Alex, yung Aswang,
yeah.
um like being a woman and trying to talk to all these men is also very uh dangerous for her, and
Mm,
yung tingin nila sa kanya is also, you know, I'm not sure if I'm making any sense, but yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, that's. I think I kind of agree with your observations as well. Um, Siguro this is second to the last question. I want to ask you about um, what you feel is the difference between a documentary created for TV versus for cinema. Do you feel there's a difference in today's context in the Philippines?
Ano ba? Ah, siguro 'pag set for TV mas romanticized yung buhay. Um,
Mm,
and there's always something that has to, like, something big that's
Yeah.
always constantly happening to, hold
Yeah.
the viewer's attention. And since it's TV, onti lang yung, how many minutes are normally dedicated for
40
TV?
minutes, I think, for a full of 1 hour slot, maybe 40 minutes of film.
So given that time frame, they would always choose scenes and conversations that are always,
Yeah.
it's either my shock value or something that
Yeah.
would have so much drama to hold viewers' attention. And this was actually something that I was talking to with one of the Japanese distributors, and he said that like to create a cut of the film that um, is able to hold people's attention, because those, he said, like, in TV, people wouldn't be, sitting down and
Yeah. Yeah.
paying so much attention to what they're seeing. They could be like
Yeah.
cooking or
Yeah.
washing dishes,
Yeah.
and so you have to have scenes that are that are whose dialogues are retaining their attention,
Mm.
and creating all these drama, so that while they're washing dishes, they could be, stimulated
Mm.
uh in that kind of way. So
Yeah.
I think that's the main difference. And also, in documentary films, I think you're given more freedom to um creatively, and to decide how to use silence and how to use scenes na walang drama.
Yeah. Yeah.
um and just you're given much more freedom to experiment with your creative decisions
Yeah.
in film. Yun yung tingin ko.
Yeah. That's the my own observation as well. Um, I said this issue again cropped up in the YCC deliberations. Na parang I think some members are having a hard time delineating what separates TV documentary from a documentary film. You know? And yeah, for me, it's quite um, different. Kasi yun nga, the reasons that you mentioned, may target market yung TV na hindi naman necessary yun din yung hindi naman ang habol ng documentary filmmaker ay hindi ratings or money,
Mm,
di ba? It's more, yun nga,
exactly.
telling the truth. Um, right. My maybe my last question has something to do with regional cinema right now in the Philippines. Um, AS for Agustin was made in Zambales. I mean, was shot in Zambales, where Agustin is based in. Um, did you ever feel like working on the film made you a part of the regional filmmaking movement, or were you always considering yourself as sort of a Manila filmmaker?
That's a good question. Sig- I don't, I guess because, like, yung training ko is very Manila
Mm,
centric. I would consider myself a Manila
yeah,
filmmaker. Like, yung sensitivities ko as a filmmaker, and like the background where I was taught
yeah,
is from Manila.
mm,
Um, but also, I'm half and half,
yeah,
because I think that the time I spent in Augustine's community sort of um, molded the type of filmmaker that I am. Like, just being there and experiencing what they're experiencing, but not being able to fully grasp their struggles. Um, so I don't know, maybe half and half. Kasi
yeah,
yung background ko nga is very Manila centric.
yeah,
my background is from UP Diliman,
Mm.
and all the filmmakers who taught me in the university are all from Manila or based in Manila, or their practice is in Manila. So
Mm.
that's what shaped them and that's what shaped me. But at the same time, because the years of experience and the years of interactions I've had with Agustin and his community sort of build that sensitivity and
Mm.
honed honed my skill as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
So there's also, I wouldn't say I'm purely a Manila filmmaker, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
And also, yeah, it does. And also, as you mentioned, that you plan on continuing your involvement with indigenous communities in the future. Um, that would always give you sort of one foot inside the perspective of the marginalized, right? The non-Manila communities. I noticed that in Damnation, the short film that you made, um, which again focused on the stories of indigenous communities that are being affected by the plan for to create a dam. Um, in general, what are your thoughts about the future of cinema in the Philippines?
In general, I think the future is very bright.
Yeah.
um, I've like all the documentaries that we have and also all the films that's coming out recently are all very um different. uh and it's fascinating to see um the films over the years and the topics that are discussed. Sobrang ibang iba. And I would always like try to compare them with Filipino American filmmakers that are based here, na parang mostly ang topics nila about identity,
Yeah.
parang, being a Filipino American. Yun yung lagi kong napapansin dito, na parang stuck pa sila dun sa ganong
Mm.
kind of topics. But in the Philippines, sobrang rich eh. Ang daming
Mm.
about, you can talk about culture, you can talk about um, LGBTQ topics,
Mm.
and hindi lang simpleng pag-engage with those types of topics. They actually, they try to experiment with the form also. They try to
Yeah.
experiment with so many things. So, yeah, I guess, tas ngayon pa na parang siguro dahil sa pandemic, nag-improve
Yeah.
yung work situation in the Philippines from, 32 hours of shooting,
Yes.
now it's down to I don't know how many hours.
Yeah.
But, and yeah, I think constantly engaging with those issues in the filmmaking industry also improves how people create films and how people work in films. So I would say that the future of filmmaking in the Philippines is bright.
Yeah.
Pwede mag-plug.
Sure. Go ahead, please.
So I am currently engaged with a book. It's called Indigenous Futures and Learnings Taking Place. It's coming out this December. It's published by Routledge.
Mm.
So it engages, I'm one of the contributor, a book chapter contributor. So I will be discussing about Abai in Mount Apo. And
Oh.
so in that book, we talk about indigenous knowledge, systems and practices. And my chapter is involved with talking about using dreams of indigenous peoples as a source of knowledge
Mm.
that is passed on to the next generation, and how they use this as um, how they use oral traditions and how they incorporate dreams in their oral traditions to um, as a form of their history or as a contribution to their history as an indigenous people. So yeah.
That's nice. Is the book coming out December?
Um, I will ito. Char, nag-vlog ba?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll recommend this to the Ateneo Library because we're
Yeah.
sort of collecting resources right now. Yeah,
So, ano siya, yung mga contributors from different, they're all indigenous women or women from non-white
yeah,
uh, countries, and they're all engaging with scholarship pertaining to indigenous knowledge.
that's very nice. Um, Thank you. Uh, Maybe the final question would be, what are your next do you think that you can make a film during your graduate studies years, or if not, what's the next film that you're thinking of?
I'm actually thinking of incorporating like short videos into my master's thesis.
Ah, nice.
So for my master's thesis, I it's like a political ecology project which engages with, let me pull that out.
Mm.
Meron akong, hold on. With it engages with a community in, well, I was thinking of using Agustine's community again, going back and exploring yung dynamics or mapping out yung mga NGOs and international and local actors in the community and creating community development projects. Um, so yeah, I'm planning to go back next summer. Well,
Mhm.
summer dito, uh, rainy season dyan,
Mm.
and do an ethnographic study in their community.
That's very nice.
And also, ano bang next? I'm currently developing a personal film about my parents' history in the underground.
Oh wow.
So it's much tougher to create a personal documentary because sometimes they don't take you seriously, especially when you ask them in front of the camera. So it's a long process that I'm not sure when it'll finish. Or
That's
yeah, still.
exciting. I look forward to that, as well as the short films, if ever you release them, the films that you'll make for your thesis. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Grace, for your time. I had a great time talking with you, and I wish you the best in your grad school. Stay there and stay safe.
Thank you. You too. I've had fun as well.
Thank you. Bye.